All right, welcome everyone. So my name is Emily Purcell. I'm one of the organizers of the Carbon Leadership Forum in Chicago, and today we're excited to kick off a series on sustainable specifications. We're pairing up with some of the other local green building organizations here. So this event today is hosted by CLF, by our Carbon Leadership Forum Hub. Got a few coming up from CSI Chicago. From Illinois Green Alliance and our partners at Living Future. So today we are welcoming Katie Veenstra and Andy Marolt from Ryan Companies. Andy is joining us remotely from Minnesota. He is also active with the CLF Hub there and has been working with a group of folks in that Carbon Leadership Forum Hub on some sustainable specification templates. So specifically for limiting embodied carbon. So we've definitely been talking for a while about getting kind of a spec writing workshop together with our CLF chapter. So we thought hosting Andy was a great fit to kind of see how that group developed this sustainable, this low carbon specification, and then how Katie and other folks at Ryan Companies have been implementing it within the company. So before we jump into that, I just want to let you know we've got a couple more events in this series coming up. So the next one's going to be March 25th at noon, just again, a webinar like this one. Speaker is Keith Simon from Salas O'Brien, and that's hosted by CSI Chicago. So the focus of that next event is going to be on commercial energy efficiency, so energy codes and new standards for like air tightness and energy performance. And again, it's focused on sustainable specification. So it's about how we write specs to actually build in and enforce those energy standards on projects. There's a QR code there to register, and I will also paste the link in the chat in just a moment. And then coming up in April, we're still nailing down the exact date and time, but it'll also be just a webinar during the day. Living Future is going to present basically a holistic approach to better materials. So how they've used Living Building Challenge specs on projects, whether they're going for full Living Building certification or not, to get better materials from both a carbon and ecological and human health perspective. So yeah, we're excited to check those things out coming up. Paste that link in a moment. And I guess just as far as logistics for today, we are recording this. We will send a link out to a recording to the attendees after the fact. And let's see, this you should be able to self-report this for CEUs to GBCI. We are looking into whether we can get AIA credit as well. And when we resolve that, we will let you all know as well. So let me stop sharing and I will hand it over to Katie and Andy to kick off the presentation.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Emily.
All right, can everyone see the presentation?
Yep, we can see it, Katie.
Great. So as Emily mentioned, this is kind of a combo of some content that the CLF Minnesota subgroup started to pull together, which Andy will present. And then at the back end, I will share a case study of a couple projects and some in-depth research efforts that we've come across using that format of language and some partnership with our structural engineers. Just a quick, I've got a couple placeholder slides in here. If you're new, Carbon Leadership Forum focuses on resource sharing and connecting members on kind of collective action to decarbonize the built environment. This really is fitting under kind of our community efforts, of course, CLF Chicago. And yeah, this is quick description, and our objectives for this goal is really to help you guys understand why to put carbon goals in your specifications, what baselines you can reference when you're trying to create that language, and whether you want to do baselines for a firm-wide template or a project-specific goal, and then how to write those things in and how to analyze the project progress against those goals that you set. Again, embodied carbon is going to become more and more relevant as our buildings become more and more energy efficient. So it's really important to take a look at buildings' holistic life carbon. With that, Andy, I will hand it over to you to walk through the process of the CLF Minnesota subgroup.
Fantastic. Thank you, Katie. And of course, this is coming out of the hub portion of that diagram that Katie showed. We identified a specification subgroup within our CLF Minnesota hub. So we'll briefly go through and introduce that team, introduce the background of our project, showcase some of our goals, go through our workflow on how we got to these templates, and then the overview of our specification sections, just high level overview, what kind of thoughts went into creating those. And then we're going to put those into practice a little bit, and how our team used kind of mock workflow to refine these. And then we'll talk about some of the challenges we ran into. We'll show some example specs, and then Katie will go through some case studies and how, not on the mock workflow side, but on the real side, the actual project case study side. So the CLF Minnesota Hub specification subgroup, we've been at it for a couple of years now. Got some very talented folks on this team. Myself, that's not to pat myself on the back. More of the other folks I'm about to list here. Simona Fisher with MSR Design. She is the Director of Sustainability there. Java, I'm probably going to get her name wrong. Niamjav, also with MSR Design, and she's more a sustainability specialist and user of EC3. Annie Perkins with Sustainable Forestry Initiative, and then Laura Eder, who is the principal at ESG for Sustainable Architecture. So the background of our project, as a group, we had some kickoff meetings. We kind of struggled. What is our goal? What are we trying to do? What is the purpose of this subgroup? And after kicking the tires a lot on some different topics and different initiatives, we decided, let's take a look at what Carbon Leadership Forum is already doing. And what we discovered on their website, this was a couple of years ago, was CLF has a model LCA specification project. And I definitely invite folks to check that out on the website. This was authored by Leif Johnson at MKA Structural Engineers. I don't believe Leif is still there. I think he's moved to another firm now. We did reach out to him, and we asked Leif if we could kind of take the baton. He had just done structural specifications, as you would expect. Leif was okay. He said, go for it. We saw this as an opportunity here for our hub to add architecture and interior scope to this initiative. Now, this is through the hub level of CLF, so this is not a national initiative, but it's something that we saw opportunity for, and would certainly want to propose this to national. I would say, Katie, one more thing on that. I would say that I was really surprised when I checked in last month on this website. There are now buy clean updates for the state of Washington. So if anyone's working there and you need that buy clean specification language, this is really good language that they had just posted there. So we'll put a plug in for that to check it out. Okay, so goals. So we sat around the table, we said, what do these templates look like? We're going to expand these. They haven't been touched since 2018, and we're in late 2022 when we started this project, probably 2023. And we said, basically, we need to develop specification language that we can use in project manuals. It has to be usable language. So these templates are cut and paste tools for practitioners. The disclosure and measurement is what we were after. How do we optimize carbon? How do we achieve carbon optimization on our projects? What does that process look like? How do these specifications help us get there? Of course, BPDs, that is our data collection and our source for comparative analysis. How do we collect those? How do we do it accurately, consistently through a project? How do we govern our technical sections? Of course, if those familiar with CSI know, Division 1 sections govern the technical sections, so we don't have to repeat everything. There's a hierarchy there. And then what technical sections should we tackle? And then within those sections, how do we scope those sections for this effort? And so we talked about those topics you see. And then the other was, initially, the CLF sections were very lead centric. There's a lot of reference to lead in there. And we said, let's get away from that. Let's make these certification agnostic. And that way we can use these across the board. That was our goal. And then lastly, what is our tool for collecting the data, for analyzing the data? And we landed on EC3. And that was, in quotes here, that was the best tool at the time, and maybe still is, the best tool for comparing carbon performance. But it came with some challenges, and we'll get to that later. So our workflow, this was challenging because you can end up boiling the ocean or attempting to boil the ocean, right? If anyone's picked up CSI master format, just the table of contents of that book of spec section titles is over an inch thick. So we have limited time. We're all volunteers, passionate volunteers. How do we do this without, getting in too deep on this? So we said, let's tackle 20 specification sections that historically give us the greatest impact. And so we said, okay, well, that means different things to different firms, depending on the sector you're in, the types of projects. So we sent the table of contents out to everybody. We all marked up our top 20. We came back in another meeting. I said, where is the overlap? And through that exercise, we landed on this list here, which I don't expect folks to be able to read here. If you can, great, but this just gives you a general look at that. As you can see, there's some interior scope. There's also exterior scope. So we wanted a balance of that as well. We also needed to define what our Division 1 section looked like. We needed to draft that and see how it interacted with the other sections. And we needed to define our units of measure and our baseline. That was really critical because when we start comparing things and standardizing things, we need those solidified. Then we drafted our templates, we reviewed. We also brought in some subject matter experts. We reached out to Sustainable Forestry Initiative through our hub member. And then also through University of Washington, we had a meeting with them that was mostly on how this progresses into Buy Clean initiative and language, as well as University of Minnesota sustainability director. We met with them just to make sure we're on the right track with this and that we're trending properly. Then ultimately we did update and post those sections to our hub site for the members to review. So Division 1, we landed on a section called Embodied Carbon and LCA Product Requirements. This was somewhat of an overhaul of what was previously there on the website, and you'll see that. What we wanted to do with this section was we wanted to educate users of the section, so we provided definitions that on EPDs, on the LCA process, LCI, the PCRs, things that we typically that come into play here that we wanted to provide some definition on. And then we started to define what our carbon performance is, the submittal requirements for collecting this data. And then our team couldn't resist because they are so passionate about sustainability. We had a little scope creep on our project and started getting into AIA material pledge, which was way beyond the scope of this project, but we couldn't resist. So there's some things in there on material ingredients, product certifications, and some circularity. Those are mostly frameworks. We didn't really populate that much. That's just a framework for designers to begin adding to. In the technical sections, we established product specific LCA reporting data, just kind of reading that first line. And that's important for comparing the LCA data between the suppliers and similar materials. The biggest takeaway here in the technical sections was identifying what our carbon baseline should be. We'll get into that with the examples. So these are just questions we asked of the team. And then how do we use these sections to evaluate carbon performance? And by use these sections, that's the design team. That's also the construction team. And then how do we populate this with the correct information? So what is the data from EC3 that can be used? And then ultimately, what does submittals look like for collecting this data? So you can just kind of hear just how I read that slide, that we were struggling through this. We really did struggle on this. We had iterations and iterations. We blew the scope up, we reduced the scope, we dialed it back, we had lots of refinements. And then finally we just said, hang on, let's just take a product and workflow it. And so we just said, let's just take carpet, for example, an interface carpet. Let's put that through workflow from design all the way through into bidding and into construction. And let's see what happens to that along the way. And how does that affect our specifications and our workflow and our process and what we're looking for from all the players involved. That's when it really clicked for us. And you'll see that on the next slide. Okay, so here's a crazy diagram that we put together, and this is when we put that into practice. So that carpet selection, that interface carpet selection, we identified that basis of design, right? We had a design solution, and that design solution was interface carpet. And then we took that and we said, let's evaluate this. Our project has carbon goals. Let's evaluate this through EC3, because our goal is carbon optimization. So we took that product and we said, well, what are we measuring it against? Because we're looking at those who have used EC3 know that there's like on the right there's a box and whisker where you can see what percentile, what quintile, and so forth that it falls in. But and you have to set your baseline. And Katie, if I'm speaking, I'm not a sustainability specialist. I'm a specifier. So if I'm speaking, correct me. If I'm speaking out of turn on this. But this is so Java did this for us, and so she ran this through. We used CLF North America material baseline values to compare the product, and then we said, is there enough competition? Are there enough manufacturers and products in there that we can with the parameters set where we can actually this can be done in real life, and it's the product's available. The manufacturers we see in there are reputable, and we think they're within budget because we're not bringing some wild material in from overseas. And then is the reporting consistent among product types, which we'll get to that in challenges. That's not always the case. So those are some of the questions we asked. So we went through an evaluation with this carpet. So far it's not triggering too much specification language just yet, but we're dealing with that basis of design. Now we're establishing our acceptable carbon performance. So we said, yep, it meets all those, it checks all the boxes. And let's take a look at those embodied carbon emissions and set our limit. And then that limit then becomes our specification. Where do we think this can land in that box whisker diagram, right? And we said, well, in this case, there's enough there, we can actually get this 20th percentile, the lowest 20th percentile. And is it too restrictive? No. So there was plenty of options here for us in this exercise. So we graduated out of that into specifying the products. So we listed, just in this mock exercise, this mock workflow, we listed interface in this case, not picking on interface or plugging interface in any way. That's just the one we chose. We listed that as our compliant product in the spec. We associated that with the carbon performance that we deemed acceptable for meeting our optimization goals. We set the impact categories, the unit of measures for the impact categories within the EPD. Those are different. We'll get to that in challenges in a minute here. And then we said, what do we need on this product as we go into bidding, as we go into construction, as we go into that whole CA phase of the project? What information do we need? What data collection do we need? And how do we mitigate erosion through submittals of our design intent? How do we hold the spec? So we had to get language in there that we could verify in submittals, such as the EPDs, the carbon performance, cost data, etc. And then we utilize that not only to collect the data for the project, for hitting project goals as they accrue, but then also for evaluating any substitution requests to mitigate any design erosion through that process. And then we took that into the verification stage. So we hypothesized, okay, we're in CA. How's this working for us? How is this mock spec holding up? What revisions do we need to make to ensure that the verification process is going to plan? And then in the end, we met our goal through this workflow of obtaining the data. And you can see on the right, what is that data? And in this case, it was for LCA, it was the EPDs, recycled content, biogenic carbon, bill of materials, quantities, and itemization for all the products. So that was a lot for one slide, but this was the slide that really got us there on this project. Okay, so challenges on the data side of things. As we took the CLF sections, so we started with the existing CLF sections that were structural specs, and the units of measure under the impact categories. And we'll show those for those who don't know what I'm talking about. You'll see it in a minute. It will make sense. Those EPD categories, global warming, potential eutrophication, those are just some of the examples. Those are measured on with different metrics based on your material. So that was a surprise to us. It was a surprise to me. And so we couldn't just take and replicate what structural had done for steel or what they had done for concrete and applied that to carpet or apply that to gypsum board, etc. So we said, we need to go into the model, into EC3, and we need to look at that. We need to look at the baselines, make sure those are all consistent. And some of the examples were, you can see there, these are just all the various examples. So it's just not, you can't just apply this across the whole spec. You have to dial it in. The other was, once we did that, we noticed further issues for evaluation, and that was, in this case, we had the units of measure were correct, but the service life differed. And so Java was going through our mock examples, and she said, uh-oh, most of these, it's determined by the PCR, the product category rules, but most of the reporting matches that, but we get these outliers every now and then. So we might get the service life of 30, which is specified in the PCR, and that's what you're seeing with the products in the library. But then you get the occasional one that will be like 75 years. So that kind of blew things up a little bit. So we said, okay, so that's more on a case by case analysis. We can't really standardize that in our specs. And then the other was, this was a major one for us in our specification development. This was a huge challenge for us. This is all kind of in development in many ways. The libraries we were looking at, there were categories that just frankly did not have EPDs, or maybe just one. And so we looked at that and we said, okay, we can't standardize specifications for those scope items because it's not developed yet. So you'll see in our examples, we do say in development for some of those. So that was a huge challenge for us. But our expectation is that will continue to progress and those libraries will be populated. So the baseline was really important for us. In this case, no surprise, this is a CLF effort. So we chose CLF North American Materials Baseline. Katie will show some examples later on how that relates to some other baselines, but this is the one we chose for the specification project. So folks may, if you're not familiar with that, take a screenshot of that link down at the bottom, and that should get you there, or just Google it. It's pretty accessible. And then, of course, the other tool that we used for this effort, for kind of doing that mock workflow, was EC3. So these are the two that we really kind of landed on and utilized for this project. Okay, so with that said, we'll get into and we'll actually show what we produce.
I'm gonna stop sharing and give it to you, Andy.
I will attempt to share here, so we'll see how this goes. And what we're going to start with is the Division 1 section. That should be coming up here any second. Hopefully folks can see that. Katie, is that showing up okay? Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So this is our Division 1 section. We drafted embodied carbon and LCA product requirements. And this is, the intent of this section is to serve as a cutting and paste template for architects, engineers, for adding those to their master specs or project specs for that matter. So we kind of led off with our purpose, and we go through that. This is essentially, this section is for LCA reporting, collecting the data, and it's used for the comparative analysis. And it talks about how we did that and what the rules are for that. We then went into definitions. We added definitions of EPDs, probably nothing new for a lot of folks on this. And then we got into life cycle assessment, probably also not a surprise for folks. And then we got into some things that were new, and these were not showing up in the previous CLF templates, and this was the life cycle inventory. And these are data sets that you can find various data sets of life cycle inventory, and this gets into what those data sets are and how they're used. And then we got into the product category rules as well, which are parameters for establishing parameters for the assessment, right? Getting into carbon, embodied carbon submittals. Item C was important. There is a set of documents that work together in order for this data to come into focus for a project. And what we found when we put this into practice is the bill of materials is really critical for getting the quantities, the amounts, and then you can start using your carbon calculators to tell the story. That in conjunction with the EPDs. We provided our parameters for our definitions for EPDs. And then we got into carbon performance. And so this gets back to that mock workflow we did where we established our carbon limits and what our baselines were. And then we established that in this case, and I'll just highlight here, subparagraph 2. In this case, we had the lowest 20th percentile of each product category. So that was our goal. Now, again, going back to challenges, that's not always the case because some of those categories aren't built up in EC3. So those, I just want to flag those so that folks don't go down this path with a broad brush and then realize that, yeah, there's some holes there. And in EC3 where this doesn't, that's going to be too aggressive. Then we just had a little bit of our scope creep, and that was our AI pledge, getting into material ingredient submittals, product certifications, and circularity. But that is, again, just a framework that is TBD. We're kind of developing that separate from CLF effort. What I'm going to do is go into one exterior section and one interior section. We'll just kind of show how that information comes together. And we'll start out with building installation. Hopefully folks are seeing that okay. Okay, so this is a general template for a technical section, much more specific than Division 1, because again, you got to think about that hierarchy of information. Division 1's general and overarching. Technical sections are now getting more specific and tailored to the actual scope item. So in this case, we led every one of our templates off for all of the sections that we created with definitions. Just we thought it was that important to put that in each section, explaining that, you know, these are we're utilizing the CLF North American baseline values. And as we got into submittals, we kind of went through some things here that are beyond the scope of this project with emissions and product labels. And then we got into EPDs. And so this is where it got really interesting for us, was the impact categories. Now, our predecessor who created those structural sections for CLF utilized this structure. So we were building onto it. Now we know this is all within the EPDs. So if you just ask for EPDs, you're getting it. But we thought we would break this out because there's enough variability. And we're utilizing the global warming potential and depending on the project goals, maybe some of these others as a point of decision when comparing options between products. So we thought we'd keep these front and center and continue to do what Leaf had done in the structural sections, just apply it now to the other scope, interiors and architecture. In this case, this is when we really learned that, yeah, these vary, the units of measure. So this is insulation, so we're square meter at RSI 1 for all of our measures. that's important because as we start reporting, we want to see those, and that could give us leverage to reject a substitution or accept a substitution and still stay on track with goals, or verify our product in submittals. And that relates to bill of materials, which is giving us our quantities. It's very important to get those quantities. And then you see this unit of measurement come up again. We want those quantities reported using that unit of measure. So now we can feed this all into our carbon calculators. We have the missing information where we can start utilizing our carbon calculator with confidence. And again, we had a little bit of scope creep with HPDs, not part of this group. Carbon performance, this is, we decided, so CSI section format leads off every part 2 with performance requirements. So you probably have seen that in your specification sections. It used to be manufacturers, and then, I don't know, years ago, they decided move performance requirements from part 1 of your spec to the beginning of part 2. And so our team decided these are the sustainability attributes. These are performance requirements of the product we're analyzing. They're just performance requirements for sustainability. And so we led with carbon performance, and then we continued on with other sustainability categories. In this case, for insulation, we had embodied carbon emissions limits. We have this for each of our products when we see a robustness in EC3. So as we go and look at these, when we remember that workflow, that mock workflow with all the diagram squares and arrows and stuff, when we're going through that process and we find products that there's 3, 4, 5 different manufacturers, it's biddable, we know it's not going to hit the project budget because it's an exclusive spec. There's enough in there for competitive bidding. Then we can be confident to put this language in that technical section. Because
hey, Andy, got a quick request in the chat. Could you expand the window a little so the text is more readable?
I'm sorry. I apologize. How is that? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's pretty much filling the screen for me now.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry. I'm on a laptop. Excellent. So in this case, when we've gone through that exercise and we've seen that there is, in fact, enough in that EC3 database and that meet our goals for the lowest 20th percentile, then we can feel confident putting this language in here. Now, I'll show you that's basically the extent of it. I just wanted to show some of the other topics that we're including. And again, this is just for cutting and pasting in these carbon related requirements in your project specs. But I want to show you where on an interior section where this will be the last one I show, and then we'll get to Katie to talk through some case studies. Should be coming up here. Got a carpet template here. Hopefully folks can see that okay. So again, you'll see the same carbon leadership forum baseline values, very much the same. We get into some of the sustainability attributes for submittals, indoor air quality, etc. Some of your green product labels, certifications. And then you can see we get into EPDs. Now you can see that we're into square meters now. So that value has changed. Getting into our requirements for global warming potential. We decided that would be used to evaluate against industry average. And that'd be how we make decisions. If we haven't awarded products, that would be how we would do it. It would help inform that decision. Here you have your bill of materials again. You can see the bill of materials, that value has changed yet again. So again, that is now square meters. We're asking for itemization so we can get the quantities for our calculator. And this was interesting because we said, what about the adhesives? What about adhesives? What about when we have composite sections, right? And so that got very tricky for us. So we added a specifier note on this one. We've done it in some other templates of ours where the carbon limits and the baselines are in development. So yeah, we noted that. And then the adhesives and other installation accessories are typically not included in scope A1 through A3 emissions. So this got challenging for us because now we had to start excluding some things, and then we're not telling 100% accurate story. So we're hoping this progresses. We didn't know how to handle it, so we just wanted to flag it here. If folks have run into this in the past, and definitely throw that in the chat for folks, that would help us out. But that was one thing I did want to flag, is that also with curtain wall and storefront, we noticed that, you know, when you get into the composite products, right? Composite meaning you have aluminum and you have glass. In this case, you have carpet, you have adhesive, you have multiple products. So how is that being treated? And we saw some inconsistencies there, especially with glazing. We saw that being treated as a composite. So our units of measure were much like carpet, we're seeing square meters. But then we also had manufacturers reporting in linear meters. So that tells me they're excluding the glass. So there's some things that we still need to see some consistency on in the industry for reporting, but I did want to flag those. And then again, you can just kind of see we're getting into some of your typical other attributes beyond carbon. But we couldn't resist leaving those out, so we added those. And that's essentially where we landed. We wanted to keep this very simplified. You're probably wondering, that's all there is. Yes, that is, but I wanted to demonstrate the kind of the madness behind it. In order to get there in a very succinct way was our goal, to have just the information needed to actually execute the work and the workflow. And our goal was to just provide that salient information in order to do that. And with that, Katie, I will hand it over to go through some very exciting case studies.
Thanks, Andy. I did see one question in the Q&A. If you want to just speak to, are these spec templates available online through CLF Minnesota? Are they posted somewhere that people could grab as a resource?
They absolutely are. We have a QR code at the end of this presentation where you can access those. Those are, and that is to access our hub and where our hub is hosting those templates. They're still in review. So we have our hub looking at those with the intent of finalizing. So certainly an opportunity to access that through the QR code and review and comment or use and refine as you like.
Perfect. Thanks. Right, taking back over the screen, I'm going to go through one case study of a project and then 2 lessons learned about specific materials. We're mostly going to be talking about concrete and gypsum board. So the case study of the project is the Lee and Penny Anderson Arena that is currently under construction in St. Paul, Minnesota. The client goal is LEED Silver for all campus buildings. And with this project, energy was a huge challenge for us, needing to maintain certain conditions for that Division 1 ice sheet. So looking to materials became a really big focus for the project team to hit that silver goal. And a life cycle assessment, of course, being the first step on the embodied carbon journey for materials. MBJ Engineering is our structural partner. You'll hear me refer to them quite a bit. And Vertical Group is our lead consultant who conducted the life cycle assessment. And then our cement mix came through Cemex in partnership with our own self-performed concrete construction crew. So this is the results from our initial life cycle assessment. We use the schematic design Revit model to pull in results at the beginning of DD. And then with the structural engineer's help, took a look at this. And of course, we knew right off the bat with precast walls and a lot of concrete, including precast structural stadia for the seating bowl, that was going to be the big area we have to focus. And particularly because a lot of precast manufacturers don't allow you to amend their mix designs, really focusing on what we could touch in the ready mix area, as well as in steel sourcing, aluminum sourcing, and the insulation products that we used. So we felt like a realistic goal could be up to 20% whole building reduction. And we refined this throughout the process and then ran the final results at the end of CDs, which are currently in comment review with GBCI. what our structural engineer did, and I'll show you this table in a moment, was go through all of the mixes that they had in their design, pull quantities out of their Revit model, and then show us kind of where they felt like realistic mixed GWP targets were compared to the volume of materials provided. So we could really understand which mixes had more or less power to influence that overall total. And so they did assign each mix its own target, but we went through and kind of adjusted with them of what types of mix amendments could be made to get to those targets. And at this time, we were using the 2020 NRMCA regional averages. There is a newer version out now, but that's the baseline that they were most comfortable with. And we did have a section, as Andy referenced, we were slightly ahead of his development of 13.510. So we did have one that talked to the contractor about what EPDs and what submittals we required to back up this data. But you could see here, this is just the example of footings. So where they were already listing their strength, their water cement ratios, the aggregate size, any other mixed design requirements, they added a line for that GWP and specifically what units they wanted it reported in so that we would be able to check that in construction when we receive the submittals. And this is kind of a preview of that table where, again, they went mix by mix. And as we started to get into construction, we worked with that mix supplier to populate the labels of the mixes. So you could see even 2 different areas to break in exterior walls that were going to be poured in regular time versus cold weather mixes, and give this a chance to say this was our overall target of 20%, and these are the targets that we assigned with the volume, so you could see how they each contribute, but give that mixed plant provider and concrete subcontractor a chance to say, well, maybe we can't hit that goal for this specific mix, but where could we adjust it to get to that same overall goal if we can, let's say, go lower in one area and higher in another. And so again, you could see that slab on metal deck here became an area where they felt very comfortable making big improvements because that was going to be poured inside the building, better temperature conditions, and they felt like they could use a good blend of admixtures and still get the finish and the strength they wanted. But they did not feel confident in some of these other areas. They felt like they weren't going to maybe make the progress that they were hoping for. And with every cold weather mix too, this project had some schedule challenges. Those cold weather mixes needed better setting capabilities and higher cement content than we'd anticipated. So this allowed them to flex back and forth in what we were originally hoping for, but still hit that overall goal. And they actually made their own set of columns to track as they were pouring, how much volume had been poured, what the GWP was of those mixes. And really it came into play for, again, those cold weather mix designs. If they were having to amend, were they still coming in close to that target if they had to use more of one mix than the other one they were thinking of? And as they were going with that volume, how it was developing. I know this is a really big and complex table, but overall, again, you can see this is where they originally thought they would come in. And as they were pouring, this is back in like August, they were hitting about 25% of their total GWP was poured in the field. And so they were tracking relatively well with hitting that overall goal. We have since used their table with a different project in Texas, and we're trying to help set mixed GWP goals for a client who's a little bit more flexible. We're not submitting this one to lead. And so we originally said, let's just try for a 10% GWP reduction across the board on these projects. For an industrial building, it really is just the structural slab, especially when you have insulated metal panel walls. That's pretty much where 90% of your concrete goes, is in the slab or in the site paving. So we set these baselines based off of the 2 mixed strengths that we had. And said what's achievable. And in the process of kind of sharing what baselines would be appropriate here, where we were kind of choosing our own, the contractor kept pushing back and saying, well, what about this one? Well, what about this one? And if you can see here, this is the same targets in the same South Central region for all of these different reporting areas. And this was EC3 limited to the Texas area of the US. And there's a pretty drastic difference between what that baseline could mean for, are you reducing or are you just achieving the baseline? Right? When you hold yourself to NRMCA 2020 like we did, they're pretty forgiving. But EC3, surprisingly, when I pulled these results a couple weeks ago, had even higher averages that they generated because it's generated off of kind of the parameters that you set in your search. So it doesn't necessarily kind of bring in that rigor of what should or shouldn't be counted that baselines like CLF or the NRMCA include in their data sets. And you can see the new NRMCA report really tailors pretty closely to CLF 2023. Again, specific to South Central region, but it brings a lot of confidence to using either one of these because they really end up largely the same. So that was one lesson learned. The other one is understanding your data sets for materials like Andy talked about can still be a little tricky. So we did go through and do some internal research on the gypsum board and a few other categories that Andy's been researching with the CLF Minnesota group. And we looked at products that we typically, manufacturers we allow, products that we specify for something as simple as like a 5/8 type X drywall, and said, okay, what's that CLF baseline? what would be EC3's considered baseline? Again, note they're not exactly the same. And then if we try to target that 20th percentile, what would that look like? And when we pulled about 6 different manufacturers' EPDs, we found that for some reason we couldn't find any within that percentile and we were confused. So we actually reached out to CLF for some technical guidance. And the reason that baseline on EC3 gets so low for that 20th percentile is that there is one single manufacturer who does every one of their plants, which is great, very specific data, but they are also the only manufacturer who includes biogenic carbon, which subtracts that number down from A1 through A3. So their numbers were, it's not artificial, they were just counting what others wasn't. It came from the paper facing, and all of these products had a paper facing. So they were just using different math in the generation of their data. And you could see again here, there's that negative number that's setting them up for a lower baseline than everybody else. Is their product better or not? It's really hard to compare, right? Everybody has a paper facing. It's just that everybody else's EPDs weren't counting that as biogenic carbon, but maybe it is an honest piece of data. And so be careful when you are using those baselines to understand, again, in this case, it would have been limiting us to only using that one manufacturer who may or may not have a plant in the area or may or may not be the low bidder, or there may be some other reason why we wouldn't want to limit ourselves down to one. And so as you go through product categories, like Andy mentioned, just really take a look at who's available. And, maybe in this case, we'd set ourselves at the 40th percentile to leave 3 manufacturers at the bottom of that slice, depending on the project. So with that, what everyone's been waiting for, link to the Word documents. Here's your QR codes. I will pause there, and I think we are ready for questions.
And I hope those are still valid, Kate. I hope those are still working.
I haven't tested them. If they're not, please let us know in the chat, and we will follow up with better ones.
Yep.
Do we work with material scientists or chemists to translate some of these unit inconsistencies? Could that be helpful? It could be. Right now, speaking to the efforts of my team, it's just a handful of designers and architects that have a passion for sustainable materials that are contributing some of their extra time around projects to help pull these and consolidate into one really massive Excel spreadsheet so that we can go back and reference it when we have questions come up on projects. So we're just slowly archiving an internal database with links to external resources like those manufacturer EPDs. So not necessarily a specialist, but like I said, we did reach out to CLF to understand with that gypsum board question, we couldn't tell the difference and we weren't kind of feeling confident enough in our expertise to understand that. So I would recommend if you do have a question on some of those either unit inconsistencies or an unusual result you're seeing in an EPD, either going to a group like CLF with that question or trying to go directly to the manufacturer and see if the consultant often who prepared theirs can provide some clarity.
I'll ask something as well. You guys had shown like you were requesting a LCA document for these products with like the full set of metrics, not just GWP, but like the ocean acidification and energy use and all those other metrics. Were you referencing those at all or using them, or were you totally focused on GWP and just looking for a backup document?
That is an excellent question, Emily. Yeah, we were just in the CLF templates. We were just focusing on the global warming potential for any decision making or reporting. So that's an excellent question. We could potentially streamline that further because those don't really relate to anything else that we're using within the data for evaluating products or substitutions.
Yeah, and at this time, if you pull those EPDs into a life cycle assessment, it depends on the tool you use. But something like one-click LCA doesn't really allow you to add your own EPDs, so it doesn't matter. You can refer to it to try and make sure you're choosing the closest approximate values within their database, but you can't pull in one that you've gotten submitted because they need to vet it before it's allowed to be used in their database. So very good point.
Interesting. Yeah, do you all were you finding that one click worked for you in inputting these specs together and helping implement them? Was that a really useful tool, or did you try out any other LCA tools in the process?
We've been focused mostly on one-click. Our team who evaluated a few years ago did kind of a deep dive into EC3 because at the time we weren't looking to conduct full life cycle assessments in-house. It was more for comparison of buildings or comparison of materials. And they felt like the flexibility of use, in our case, we're a design builder, was better for a designer or a contractor to use one-click because you can manually input values as well. And at the time, we were ahead of the Tally LCA curve to be able to better import our models into EC3. So that was a big hang up for them. We've had it on our radars to go back through and reevaluate Tally now that it's got that better EC3 interconnectivity. But I would still say I feel like EC3 and one-click both have some gaps in their database. So you get pretty decent data, but you're not going to be able to find every product out there because both of them have some manufacturers still missing.
Yeah, and Emily, we CLF Minnesota used almost exclusively EC3, and that was mostly the MSR team that was in our specification subgroup. They were specialists in EC3, and so we just rolled with that.
Definitely helps that it's free.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's a question in the Q&A about performance-based specs for carbon reduction in concrete mixes. Did you use performance-based specs? Were you familiar with, or was your concrete team, internal and external, did you have familiarity with performance-based specs, or was this prescriptive for concrete mixes?
I will go back to that little snapshot. I think they've generally been prescriptive. As mentioned, we are not the structural engineers in our projects. We don't have that service in-house. So Andy has a template for cast in place concrete mix design that we certainly send to anybody who'd like to use it, but a lot of our engineers will use their own. And I would say it doesn't necessarily translate that we can influence somebody's comfort level to use that type of specification. It's been on my radar as kind of the best way to help achieve these targets. And to date, aside from that project in Texas, where I think we're just struggling with a relatively rural area and a lack of availability of some of the admixtures or cement types that we'd be looking to use, we haven't seen a huge issue with struggling to hit these baselines yet. But again, we're talking about 10 to 20% reductions from pretty forgiving baselines on the projects we've looked at to date. We do have a large global industrial client who pushes for things like 30+% reductions, and that definitely challenges you to get to those goals if you also pair it with a prescriptive spec that says, but you must bake the cake in this way, but also get me this really good result. That becomes very challenging.
That's
Katie,
really good to know. That's a great question because I hear all the time like performance-based specs are the way to do it for concrete mixes, but of course there's challenges.
Yeah, it's things like removing this water cement ratio and just saying, get me this strength gain, get me the performance quality by this date, and stop telling me exactly how much of the ingredients to use. But every engineer has a different comfort level with making those sorts of requirements.
I will say we are moving that direction at Ryan Companies, Katie. I did meet with our self-perform in construction, director of self-perform, and our director of industrial sector on the construction side of things. And really the preference there is, hey, we want to move down that road of a performance specification. So we've got a couple drafts out there that we're working on as a team internally to kind of move forward with performance specs for concrete. Seems like that is a trend that we're experiencing.
It's really great to hear.
But that's to come. That's in the future.
All right. I don't see any last questions, just a couple of thanks for this presentation. So yeah, I'll second that and say thank you very much for sharing these templates. Look forward to having the final drafts out there for folks to reference. And yeah, really appreciate your time. And thanks to all the attendees too for questions and for doing the work.
Excellent. Thanks for letting Minnesota CLF invade Chicago.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.